to the first video of a completely new format. In this video, we're chatting to former top 10 in the world Ilka men's sailor and world-class coach and Australian sailing former high performance pathways manager, Ash Brunning. Ash is going to be talking about his journey in the Ilka to the top 10 in the world from club sailing in Sydney Harbour, as well as his approach to enabling and helping others from a coaching and interdisciplinary, so really well-rounded physical, mental, and planning perspective. Welcome, Ash. You're now consulting in the high-performance sport and business services world, and also doing some private coaching on the water, which we'll dive into a bit later. But to start, can you walk us through your career journey and how you got to where you are?
Hey guys, just wanted to let you know before we jump into the full interview that if you want to work with Ash directly, I'm going to leave his contact details in the description box or the show notes down below. And if you like my content, it would be a huge favor to me if you could subscribe to the channel on YouTube and also head over to my Substack, where I'm going to drop the link in the description box as well. I send out weekly coaching emails on my Substack. So if you like what you see from me, you'll definitely like my Substack as well. Thanks for watching and enjoy the interview.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Dan. And hey to everyone out there. I think the first thing would be I grew up sailing because I really love the ocean. And I spent a lot of time growing up in regional Australia, so in Coffs Harbour, and we would do swimming and surfing and fishing and diving, and sailing was just an easy thing to do. And both my parents are pretty keen on sailing, and so I did that as a kid. And I sailed a lot of the junior classes. Like for us, we had Manly Juniors, very similar to an Opti with a spinnaker. And then I ended up getting too big, so got some advice down in Sydney when I was down there for regatta, and it's by a guy called Trax Gordon, and he basically said to me, "You're going to be too big for most classes, so I think you should try the laser." And that's where the laser campaign began. So that was back in 2001, and I got a boat and I got sorted by 2002. I was already 74 kilos, so I was basically straight into the full rig. I think 6 months in the radial, and I campaigned for a long time. So from 2002 to 2014, and in that time I went from being a club sailor. I moved down to Sydney with my parents in about the year 2000, and I went from being a club sailor at Wallara Sailing Club and just kind of worked through the various systems, so a state level system in Australia in NSWIS, or the New South Wales Institute of Sport, and then I worked with a really great training group out of Wallara, led by a guy called Brett Bayer, who's still a coach on the tour with a
legendary Ilka coach.
Yeah, legendary, and in terms of his own master sailing, incredibly successful. I think like 20 plus podium finishes or something. So very accomplished, right? And a great training group of international guys there, and so that was kind of the most important thing at the beginning. This great environment, great training partners, really knowledgeable people, and being part of that. And that's definitely a message for later as well. I finished my campaigns in 2014, so I did a full setup for the Olympic trials for 12. I finished second, so Tom Slingsby won. He won the World Championships in 2011 at the ISAF Worlds in Perth and went to the Games, where he won gold. I finished seventh that year at the ISAF Games, the ISAF Worlds. And then in the years before that, I'd been the national and the Asia Pacific champion as well of Australia. So some good wins, but then decided time to move into coaching. And I won't lie, there was definitely a period there I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I did love the sport. I still had a great passion for it. It's really easy to fall into coaching, and nice to fall into something where you've got some confidence and expertise as well. So started coaching in 2015, though I did some coaching jobs before that. So I was for example, I was in China in 2009 coaching Lijia Xu for 3 months. Well, not only her, the Shanghai sailing team. I did some stuff with the American women's development team at a World Championships in 2011 in the radial. Erica Reinecke was part of that team at the time. So cool to hang out with her, even kind of in the distance. She ended up getting her own private coach, I think. But getting some exposure to coaching early, and then stepping in 2015. And then in that time, just part of this QAS, or Queensland Academy of Sport, so one of the states in Australia, and doing development coaching. So finding the talent, and Dan, you were one of them at the time, and then really trying to help develop that talent so that it could move up into national teams, start to campaign internationally, those kind of jobs, while also doing these national coaching jobs. So going and supporting Michael Blackburn, for example, as the laser men's squad coach for a few years. I think I coached the Finn program for a year with Jake Lilly and Ollie Twiddell. 2017. And then kind of continued on that, and then managed to support Mara to winning. Mara's Mara Stransky laser radial sailor, or Ilka 6 sailor now, getting a couple of nationals wins, as well as then helping her qualify for the games in Tokyo before moving into my next role as the national pathway manager. And to keep that one really simple, because it's sport administration and management, it's just essentially the technical leadership for the performance pathway. So talent through to confirmed talent, helping everyone in the whole system move up in all classes, supporting coach development, streamlining athlete development and so forth. So that's a bit more of my my more recent background, and that's what I'm starting to do some consulting in at the moment in different sports like Taekwondo. There's been a bit of action in other places now. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I think there's a lot there, and I think you're downplaying it a little bit when you say you were just in a sports administrator role in the high performance pathways side of things. I think something which we can talk about, and I think everyone listening would like to hear about, is your experience there coaching the coaches, which you talked about a bit offline. And I think from that standpoint, there's a lot you can kind of bring to the audience around not just coaching coaches and what a good coach looks like, but also I guess you have a lot of ideas there about how to help sailors learn. So I think that's something we should dive into as well. But what I really like to do is, you talked about your journey from being a club sailor in regional Australia to then going to Sydney and meeting Brett and Trax and working with those guys, to then kind of working with blackers and slingers like Tom Slingsby, TB, those sort of guys. I think what we should do is kind of start off with your sailing career, and then kind of take away some of the lessons from that, and then we can kind of work through each part of the career and see what you learned throughout each of those phases, and how you can help the audience or give them some tips with their own journey, because we do have a lot of people who are at various different stages in that pathway, similar to the one you went along. But thinking back to your own sailing, I'd like to hear what were the 3 biggest changes in your training that helped you progress. I know you've mentioned to me a lot of times that when you did start working with Brett and his group in Sydney, that's where you really made a big leap forward. So maybe you've got some anecdotes and some tips from that point in time.
Yeah, sure. Good start, Dan, and I understand around startup sailing. So I think that probably one of the easy ones, and you've already identified it, was being part of an environment that's really conducive for development. And I was lucky. Like, I kind of fell into that environment with really great people who were developmentally minded. So they were happy and open to help. They were curious. They were looking for advantage. I kind of fell into that environment and then was willing to work, right? And so I got a little bit lucky in that. So that's definitely one of the first key factors, that the environment that you're in and the people who are around you really matter, particularly early. And it will matter later as well, but you can be a little bit more circumspect in who you choose and what it might be when you're at the high performance end of town. I think in addition to that, on let's say the training environment, a really classic one there is volume on water. And I think a really easy point to kind of speak to is that in a laser or in an Ilka, the boat needs to become an extension of you. Everything about that boat needs to become completely automated. You need to be able to unconsciously perform a 8 or 9 out of 10 tack, on demand. Because in our sport, so in sailing, when you're making decisions and when you're observing and you're thinking about things, you've got to have an automated skill set in terms of the skills of boat handling, speed skills, all these kind of elements first. So there's also a weighting to what you might lean into to become good at first, before then looking to become proficient in other areas. So
Okay.
that's two. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think from like a third, it's simple, really simple. Being part of that environment also taught me the importance of fitness for class.
Yeah.
And so, all the ILCA sailors who might be listening to this, even if you're from other classes, there's going to be a specific form of sailing that you do, and there's going to be a role that you have in the boat. What is the physical requirement that you need to perform across all conditions?
Right.
So
Okay.
how do you get fit to hike in an ILCA so that you can hike for a 20-minute beat at 80-90% capacity of your ability regularly? What do you need to do on and off the water to get there? Just another example, but these things, particularly fitness, this kind of volume or time on the water to become skilled, having the right environment, and then probably the only one. No, we could probably leave that one for later. But let's stay with those three.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really good starting point, and I think there's a lot to unpack there. What really stood out to me was what you mentioned about the boat being like an extension of yourself, basically. And what we did talk a bit about offline was sailors tend to do a lot of racing as training. And what I'm kind of hearing now is that maybe we need to think more about just practicing like those tacks, those jibes, simple boat handling maneuvers a lot more, and drilling them to the point where they are natural and you can do them blindfolded, basically. So is that something that you see a lot of sailors lacking, or something that they could be doing more of in their training?
Yeah. Well, firstly, fantastic kind of hypothesis, and I agree in principle. So the hypothesis that potentially sailors are focusing on racing too early is 100% correct. And the reason that I say it is because I've observed it in a national pathway management role where I could look at the concept of readiness. So readiness, for example, might mean if you're in a double-handed class and you can't get around the course in 15 knots, you're not ready to go to the Junior World Championships. You need to spend time at home doing handling around courses across conditions in sea states of flat water, chop to strong wind, big waves, to be able to have that proficiency to move on. And so I definitely agree in principle that there's a tendency in our sport to want to go and race and test what we know. But I think that we could get a lot better at building the fundamental qualities that you need as an athlete before progressing to racing. Now, that's not to say don't race at all, but maybe race at the level that you're ready to compete at and be proficient so that you learn. You don't just go and get punished. That's a hard thing to accept. Other people are going, I might miss out. There's a bit of FOMO occurring, but I can promise you, if you're deliberate in your focus around skills and building an unconscious competency in them, racing will be a lot easier down the line.
Yeah. And I feel like that is kind of a challenge of our sport, in the sense that, if you are a club sailor, you might have your state championship or your regional championship, which might be at your level, but then really the next step up from that is a national championship. And this is definitely something I went through when I did my first nationals. I was so far out of my depth that I think I was in a position where a lot of people probably would have quit sailing after that, because you do just get so demotivated from being so far back in the fleet. But we don't really have any like checks and balances to know when is the right time to transition to a national, like start racing at a national level or an international level for that matter. And one of the things I was thinking about when you're talking about the kind of habit to jump into racing too early is, I think we do that, or most of us race too early because we get into the sport because we enjoy the racing and the competition. So I was just thinking, do you have any tips on things we could do in our training to keep it fun and motivating without necessarily needing that super high level competition or that big challenge to push sailors?
Yeah, good question, Dan. I think one of the first things around training, particularly if you're going out by yourself or maybe in a small group, is gamification. So working out ways that you can have an objective in your training and then making it a little bit more enjoyable in terms of maybe you give yourself a number of maneuvers that you have to complete that day. You might even grade yourself out of 10 for what you were actually performing. Oh, that was a pretty 7 out of 10 tack. Maybe that one was a little bit better. But once you've got a training partner, and I think this is one of the really important points of being able to be deliberate and engaged and enjoying, one more boat on the water changes the whole world. Like, it makes such a difference. You'll remember to your own experiences, maybe you're going out by yourself. You can only really focus on certain things when you're out by yourself. And yes, you can, but it closes out a lot of opportunity versus one or maybe 2, 3 other boats. Now, of course, at the other end of the scale, 50 boats in a regatta, very hard to replicate in training, often why people go. But maybe it's about getting the skills in that smaller group level before you determine it's time to go and get into a bigger, more highly complicated or capable fleet. And I think gamification, camaraderie, people who you train with, squad culture, like being part of something that's moving forward together and learning, all great things. And I think the only other one would be thinking of guidance. So who's the mentor, who's the coach, who's the critical friend in that group? Because that's someone that you can lean on as well when things are getting a little bit monotonous. And in a skill sport like sailing, sometimes things get monotonous. And so you might need to lean on someone to go, I'm not really feeling it at the moment. Like, what could I do? And they might give you some ideas or get creative as well. So it's always a good way to approach that challenge.
Okay. Yeah, I think that actually ties in really nicely to something else I wanted to ask you about from when you were initially explaining kind of the 3 things which changed since starting to work with Brett. You mentioned finding the environment that you need, and you've talked about that just now. What I was wondering is, from an athlete's or a sailor's standpoint, what can you kind of do to actually influence that environment? And if you had any tips on that.
I think, like, if there is an environment in existence and you're trying to influence within it, you have to determine a classic kind of very human power structure. There's probably a power structure present. Is it the head coach, or is it the coach who's really responsible? Is there a senior athlete or a bit of an opinion leader? And really what you need to do, and the best piece of advice that I could give you, and one that played enormous value for me when I was a young man, would have been to be really curious. So to go and ask questions and be humble. When people say, hey, I need a training partner today, and maybe doesn't really suit what you were doing on that day, being really readily available. These things breed trust and respect, where people are like, wow, this guy, this girl's a go-getter, and it's a real opportunity for you to step into their space, but you're offering them a bit of help, right? Like, maybe they do need a training partner for that day, or maybe they just want someone to go out on the water and sail offshore for safety reasons, that's competent. It can be that simple. And for the coach, sometimes it's just around a bit of banter. Like, they just they enjoy having a chat. Like, Dan, that was you and me. Like, I enjoyed having chats with you about random things outside of sailing as well. And, that kind of relationship that you build, that's how you then go on to influencing, because with a relationship, you can influence. Without one, you're really challenged in doing that. But the curiosity thing, even like asking people, what's the worst they can say? No? Okay, sorry, like, all good. I was just curious, but you can test the boundaries, right? That's the fun of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Like, I've seen so many times through the time when I was campaigning, there's someone in the fleet who you're like, okay, this guy or this person, they're in the bronze fleet, but they're training with a guy who just podiumed at the Olympics. Like, how is this guy ended up in this position? And I think it just comes down to ultimately having kind of the not even charisma, just being brave enough to ask the person if you can train with them. And I think that's something which a lot of us are a little bit too shy to do. But as you say, what's the worst that can happen? It's that they say no. But a lot of the time they'll just say sure, whatever, because I think as to what you were saying a bit about Brett's group, these sailors who are at the top, they're not really concerned about other people joining their training or getting in the way. And for them, it's just about having that environment where there is competition for them to keep pushing themselves to kind of the next level. So I think that's a really great point. Before we got kicked out, Ash, you were talking about the curiosity and how you think it's really important for sailors to have like a curious mindset when it comes to their training and improvement. Is that what you were talking about when you spoke about being developmentally minded, or is there something else to that as well?
Yeah, for sure. Like I think the concept of like the curious learner, right, in general is always a good place to start, because people, if you think about when you're talking to, let's say, a great sailor, and maybe you're an up and coming sailor, and you come across as curious and humble, it's not dangerous. It's actually quite endearing. Like people look at that like, oh, I see a bit of me in them. It's often where mentorships begin, right? Like if you think about humans, because we all had to start somewhere, and a lot of us had to struggle. Like I remember struggling years early in Europe, as would you, Dan, and didn't have many friends, and it was tough times. But that's where you got to go out and make friends. And often by having a couple of people, by going and asking them questions and being a little bit more sociable and engaging, they're not defensive. Sometimes they're really open. Like I got some stuff out of these amazing world-class sailors just because I went and asked them a question. They told me straight up the answer, and I had to verify it later, and maybe sometimes it wasn't always accurate, but it was pretty
trust
good.
But verify.
Trust but verify. But the curiosity bit, it breaks down barriers. It's just a great way to start, and it helps you make friends. And you need friends in this game. You need friends in campaigning, right? Like just like you need friends as a coach too. You want other people to work with, and you want teams to work together, and there's competencies in that. So that's definitely a good place to start, Dan. And that curious learner is a great mental skill for a sailor.
And I think then, as you were saying, it is endearing, and it can help you get into that group that you, or train with that person who you never thought would even want to talk to you. And as you were saying, it is sometimes about just being a little bit brave and also curious to try and work your way into those environments where you do have the potential to really make big steps forward, kind of like what I know you did when you started working with Brett and his group. And so I'd like to then move on to the more of the training side of things. And, we wanted to talk a bit about 3 of the common mistakes that you see sailors make. I feel like we may have touched on some of them already when it comes to getting into racing too early, or also not focusing too much enough on their fitness, or basics like boat handling. But did you have any other thoughts on that side of things, and 3 mistakes that a lot of sailors make with training?
I think like one really easy one from the top of my mind, and it definitely came about more when I started coaching and kind of operating in sport management, was the importance of having an objective and a plan to obtain that objective, so to chase after that objective. And so the objective, for example, when you're a club sailor, might be, I want to go to the nationals and I want to finish in the top half, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I think a lot of sailors do is they have this objective, this result that they're chasing, but what they should be doing is they should be kind of almost running the concept of a bit of a regression model. So that's my end goal. What do I need to be able to do to achieve that? And how do I plan that for my training? Like, what am I doing deliberately in my training to help me achieve my objective or my goal? And I think that typically what happens is there's a little bit of like junk miles, or like laissez-faire, approach to, I've got this objective and I'm just going to go through the motions, and maybe I'll get there, maybe I won't. It's the concept of having a goal and then being really planned and deliberate around what you're doing along the way to obtain that goal. Once you've gone to that regatta and you've tested, I've done all of this planning, I've put all of this deliberate training together, I've gone and done it, and then I've gone to the regatta, oh wow, I finished in the top 40%, I've killed it. Okay, the next part that often is missed is the review of, well, what went well, what could have even been better again, and what can I iteratively do next to make another improvement. So this concept of gap analysis. And believe it or not, I reckon this is true all the way down to like junior sailing, like kids in opties going to their first nationals. It could be just 3 things that they're working on, but having a plan, and that's a really good one. Any questions or thoughts on that one?
Yeah, actually I do. I think the main question would be, and I'm thinking the audience might also have this on their mind. You talked about kind of the working backwards or regression model, where you take what's the ideal outcome or future state, and then you assess what you need to get there, and where the gap is between where you're currently at. And this is something I've spoken a bit about as well on the channel. But from your perspective, how can everyday sailors kind of assess what they need to, let's say, be top 10 at a Masters Nationals or a Youth Nationals? Is there some sort of benchmark that you can point them to, or is it looking at someone who's already there and seeing how they're better? What's kind of the best way to approach that?
Yeah, and look, you've done a great job there of already kind of thinking about it from a few angles, but a classic one, particularly the more high performance you go, is collection of intelligence, collection of evidence or data to prove why are they in the top 10? Why are they winning? Why are they winning medals? What are they doing differently to me? And the collection of that intelligence could be that same thing that we spoke about, being curious. How often do you train a week? What do you train on? It could also be like if you have a coach on the water, or maybe you've even got a parent or an interested person, can they put some film in to have a look at how they're going about their starts? Have they got a really deliberate pre-start routine? Maybe, I'm not sure. But the idea is to collect information around what good looks like first, and then build the regression model off that. So if they're brilliant at speed, right, they've got great boat speed across certain conditions. Well, it's interesting to go and ask them questions. Maybe they won't tell you, but you'll have the tell around they're very high quality in 20 knots and waves, right? Where do they live? Oh, they live in Melbourne on Port Phillip Bay. That explains it. And where do I live? Well, I live in Brisbane, and it's flat water or chop most of the time. So maybe I need to get outside the islands to live. Or maybe I need to go to Woolaba, or maybe I need to go to the Gold Coast to start practicing a different set of conditions. So I think the curiosity, but also collection of intelligence. I think these days, there's so much film on the internet too, like that you can't underestimate the value that you can get out of watching a medal race on YouTube. What does a good maneuver look like? There's huge amounts of resources and content now that you can look into to kind of work it out. So this kind of brings it back to this, curious learner. You've got to be a constant student of the sport. You've got to constantly work out where's the sport going, what's it iterating, how's it improving, how can I follow along with that? And that works at every level. That's not just high performance. That's a master's sailor, trying to work out what they can and can't do within their body or their physical capacity. Down to a youth sailor who only knows what they know, and they're learning new things every day.
As you said, there is obviously, it does scale a lot from that kind of youth sailor to someone who might be trying to get to the Olympics versus a masters sailor. And one thing which I was thinking of as you were talking about using all the available resources and trying to gather as much information as you can about what good looks like. At least what I know I'm susceptible to, and I guess others might be as well, is sometimes actually seeking out too much information, or there might be a point where you try to learn too much in a way. Do you find that to be the case at all, or do you think that just taking in anything, any content you can, might just subconsciously sort of plan itself somewhere, and you'll find a way to make use of it? Or how would someone approach that?
I think Dan, you're a pretty smart guy, and you operate in a different realm to me. I know you're much better with numbers than I will be. So quantitative analysis, that's you, right? But I think like one of the challenges with that is that you might really want to step into the analytics and try and get the evidence, but you can kind of overcomplicate things as well. I'm not speaking necessarily about you personally, but the classic line would be over-analysis paralysis. And you know, this is a challenge for people who like to get into the detail. Now, if you're a person who likes to get into the detail, you're in the right sport in sailing. However, you probably need to limit yourself to 3 to 5 things that you're working on, 3 to 5 domains or areas. So you try and isolate out areas to build proficiency, then you review and you make sure that you've got the competency that you want, and then you move on to the next thing. But don't go chasing shiny things while you're doing those 3 to 5 things. Oh, he's really fast. What's he doing? No. I'm working on my tacking and my driving today. And that's hard, you know, because it's easy to look at the shiny things. I know. But you've got to keep coming back to simple kind of frameworks for development. I love the rule of 3. And you know, up to 5 if you've got the capacity to do it, and focus in on those and get them to a high level.
Yeah. Okay. So really staying focused on those 3 to 5 things that are kind of the North Star of what you need to do to get to where you want to be, and being very, very strict. And you also mentioned this earlier about, you gave an example about a high performance sailor who they might want to work on something. You might want to join their training, but they're saying, no, I need to work on this particular thing today. And that is really a mindset they have about those 3 to 5 things that they're focusing on and that they know they need to work on to improve. And I've also seen this myself. I remember a very specific time where I was about 16 and I got the opportunity to train with Ash Stoddart, 2016 laser radial at the time, Ilka 6, Australian representative at the Olympics. And I was super nervous, and we were sailing out through the harbor in Brisbane, and at some point during the session I was kind of like following her along, and she told me, okay, you know, I need to just focus on this thing on my own for the next hour, but if you want to reconvene in an hour at this mark, I'm going to work on some starting, and it'd be good to have you join in for that particular drill. And that really stood out to me at the time. You know, it felt at the time a little bit like a letdown, but also in a way it was like, okay, that's really impressive that she has the ability to tell someone, okay, I need to work on this, and I'm going to work on this despite you know, having the opportunity to beat me up on the race course, so to speak. And that speaks exactly to what you were talking about. But one thing I would like to hear from your perspective as well is, you mentioned, okay, we've got kind of the end state, we've found what good looks like. From my sort of coaching experience, I find it's hard for sailors to assess objectively where they are at with particular skills and what they are lacking. Do you have any ideas on ways to come up with a good analysis of where you're currently at? Because I feel like some sailors can often chase the wrong thing and mistake what they're actually lacking for what they really need to improve. And so if you've got any thoughts on how to actually narrow that down, that'd be great to hear.
So really good question, and challenging in sailing. I agree. You know, like, I'm rating my tack out of 10. Well, what's that based on? Maybe that's a good question to start with. So am I comparing it against my age and stage equivalent? So I'm doing the under 21 level. I'm trying to win the worlds. What's the best under 21 in the world tacker looking like at the moment? They're the 10. They're the North Star. How am I actually comparing to that in terms of acceleration? You know, do I have the opportunity to line up with them? Maybe in the pre-start before the worlds, but maybe not. So there's a subjective element to that. But what you want is, you want some kind of reference, typically visual reference, and then you want to be able to start rating yourself based on what I'd kind of consider sailing principles. So for tacking, for example, you break it down into entry, throughput, exit. Like, what are those kind of parts? what's it look at a good stage in each, and then you'd probably break it down into all the different condition sets. So if it's flat water, you can kind of get away with a nice long luff. If it's gnarly and choppy or, you know, pretty hard, it's hard to do a long luff. You just bleed off all your speed, right? So, you know, breaking down what good looks like and then being able to apply it in that sense, that's the regression modeling. Then you've got to self-rate. And one of the things that I think is difficult is self-rating without an objective critical friend. So a critical friend could be a training partner. A critical friend could be a coach.
Yeah.
And so what I mean by that is generally someone who knows what good looks like or has a good approximation.
Okay.
And they can give you some feedback as well, because then what you look for is the divergence between scores. So what you're looking for is a growing convergence. If there's a significant divergence, we've got a problem. Who's right and who's wrong, you know, like, and that's a discussion point. So that's one way to do it. But I feel like you've got to start with evidence. You've got to know what good looks like. And maybe your coach does know that. Maybe they're a world-class or world-best coach. They've got the ability. You can really rely on them to go, yeah, no, that is a 7 out of 10, or nah, that's a 5. Like, and these are the reasons why. If you don't have that, you've got to find video of people doing great tacks across conditions, and you've got to almost screenshot it or, you know, lock out that section, and then you've got to go and try and work out ways to implement it. I know even you, Dan, you've done things like putting a camera up on the back of the boat to watch yourself, and, you know, putting the camera back through underneath the mast to see where you move in the boat. That's a good way, because essentially what you're trying to do is imitate initially, right? So these are good ways of kind of solving for that challenge. Now, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's doable.
Okay. Yeah. And something we were talking about before the recording was how with the advent of the internet and Zoom and technology like we're using now, it's become a lot easier to get access to coaches from around the world. And what I'm thinking is a lot of the audience, they won't necessarily have access to a world-class coach like you were talking about, but you did mention the option to put a camera on the back of the boat, for example. Do you think, like, if the people listening to this could put a camera on the back of their boat and then they might send their footage to you and work with you, is that a good way for them to like find where they're actually lacking and what their current situation is versus where they're trying to get to?
So there's already existing models of that, right? Like the International Sailing Academy, you know, these kind of online forums or connecting people and getting them talking. I know that Michael Blackburn had started his own version of this in Cracker Sports, where he'd centralized a database of information to help people pay a subscription, sure, but then you get access to world-class information. I think that there's things out there already, right? But to your point around coaching, absolutely. So think back to COVID. Now, I don't know what countries, you know, the audience are in, but I could imagine there'd be a few. And so in Australia, there's a really good opportunity to have remote coaching when the coach couldn't actually be out on the water to support the athlete, but the athlete could be out doing some exercise. Yeah. Right. You know, under some of our COVID laws in Australia, which are reasonably draconian compared to the rest of the world, particularly if you lived in Melbourne. Unlucky for the Melbourne people who are listening in, but you look to remote coaching. You know, you try and get some of that critical feedback, that constructive feedback around what are they seeing, and video tells a great story. Like it, you know, with the right angle, you know, and a good approximation of what good looks like, you can get a really quality feedback, and it's definitely a viable option. And I think that one of the things that's another opportunity in terms of the growth is campaign support, in terms of people who support campaigns from a distance, who know campaigns really well and can help athletes go through those iterative cycles of review. What are my new actions to solve for my gaps? They go off and they do the thing. Maybe they're even working with a coach, but then they come back and they do that review again. And I think there's a growth market in that. I know it's true in other sports as well, particularly triathlon, cycling, you know, things like this. Because they look at physiological data, they look at race scores, you know, it's a conversation often. If the athlete's good enough, they've got some self-awareness. So that's another opportunity as well.
So I guess from a sailing standpoint, I feel like when you were coaching me, we had that in a way. I'd often be over in Europe and you'd be back in Brisbane, and we'd have a call similar to this, and we'd discuss, what the next regattas were and what the focus was. But for some of the sailors listening to this who might be interested in something like that, is that something you're able to offer now that you're off consulting on your own, and what does that look like, and what would be sort of the focus for something like that?
I think for like anything, it always starts with a conversation. So
Okay.
what are you trying to do, and where are you trying to go? And then really trying to get an understanding, even just at a conversational level, around where are you at now?
Yeah.
And then what are you currently putting in place? And then what could you think of almost in addition?
Yeah.
Like I've had some great, like, let's say, initial conversations with a few sailors exploring some coaching when I finished with Australian Sailing. And a big part of it was looking at their competition planning, and they're loading 8-9 regattas a year.
Yeah.
It's like dangerous in terms of burnout in high performance, right? And in, let's say, development sailing or master sailing, it's just injury prone. So like these kind of things, you can learn a lot from a conversation, but it has to start with a conversation, and then you tailor the product to support whatever the need is, because you can't cookie cutter it in sailing. It's too high variable. It's too complicated. So, what is their need, and what is their focus of attention now, and then try and solve for that product. And that's actually the coach development field that I worked in my previous role as well, right? Like, what's your role as a coach? Well, it's to ask questions and listen.
Okay. And I guess from a coaching perspective as well, being curious. And I think that ties in really nicely into the next point we wanted to talk about, which is really this long-term program. I think we've talked a lot about a campaign to like a single regatta or a single key goal, but something that I know you're very focused on, and that you've worked a lot on developing in different high performance programs, and also with the athletes you've worked with, is like very deliberate long-term program. Thinking to some of my audience, I think it usually breaks down into two different categories. Kind of the aspiring youth sailor who they want to get better at a state or national level, maybe worlds, and they might in the back of their mind have the idea of going to the Olympics, kind of where both you and myself started at the club level in Australia. And then I think the other big segment of listeners is master sailors who haven't sailed in a while, or they've kind of sailed throughout their life, but they've never really had the coaching and support that we've talked a lot about today. So I'd be keen to hear your thoughts on how should sailors structure and approach that long-term development, and what time frame does that even look like, and what kind of phases does that even entail?
Yeah, great question, and massive topic really to cover, but I'll try and make it high level enough so that there's something to kind of build off. So different countries apply different, let's say, athlete development methodologies. So one that we operate in Australia, for example, is What It Takes to Win, which is essentially the gold medalist, all the different profile factors into a gold medalist or a medalist at the Olympic Games or the Commonwealth Games. And then what are those factors? What are the attributes that go into those factors? And then you try and regression model it. So that's What It Takes to Win. Athlete development framework, also relevant to, say, us, the UK, some other countries. That's based on the regression model itself. So if I'm in the middle, if I'm a developing level athlete, maybe I'm 21 years old, and what do I need to be doing at this level to be a podium athlete one day? And the inputs for reference would be things like, typically across sports, not just in sailing, but technical. So that tends to be technique and skills based. Then the next one is tactics and strategy, or strategy and tactics. So in sailing, that's really appropriate and applicable. But in many sports, it might just be tactics. Then the next one is physical. So what do I physically need to do to obtain my goal? Like, what are the benchmarks, or what do I need to be chasing? Mental. So that's the next kind of domain, and that will factor. And that sits in, what do I mentally need to be able to do to perform in this sport? Could that be resilience? Could it be decision making? Could it be being able to process lots of different variables? I can tell you in sailing, that's a classic one. And then environmental is my environment around me conducive for development? So are the people around me, is my coach, is my performance support, so psychology, nutrition, strength and conditioning, all of these different elements, are they conducive for my development? Is this helping me get to where I want to go? Yeah. And the final one is experiential. How long should it take me to get from A to B?
Yeah.
And so that's the core basis of the model. Now, in different countries, there's different versions. So Singapore has like an amalgamation of 3 models. So that model, the LTAD, which is the Canadian model, long-term athlete development model. And then they've got their own version that they've kind of inserted into it more recently, and they've just launched this. Right. So you can see that on Singapore Sailing. Good guy there, Terence Coe. He's doing a lot of work in that space. Right. But the thinking is that essentially a lot of it's the same. It's these factors and attributes, and what do I need to do across all of those domains to win or to be successful? Now, the basis of that is the concept of marginal gains. So marginal gains is a concept by a guy called Sir Dave Brailsford, so British cycling. He comes up with the concept of marginal gains, which is used in business, in sport, and everything. And so basically what the concept was if I look at every factor and every attribute in all the different domains of my sport and I improve by even 1%, we're going to be dominant. And he implements that in British cycling. And they win, I think, 66 gold, Paralympic and Olympic medals in his time as the performance director. Previously a successful country, but not to that level, not even half of that. And then goes on to Team Sky with Chris Froome and wins 6 out of 8 Tour de France's with this concept of marginal gains. And essentially, this concept of marginal gains, breaking it down into factors and attributes, this is the beginning of the what it takes to win methodologies, or the long-term athlete development methodologies, this kind of holistic, all the domains together around, well, what's it going to take to be successful? And so I think, like, if you think about a youth sailor or you think about a master's sailor, to your original question, break it down into those domains. So technically, how's my technique? How's my skills? So that could be speed skills, that could be boat handling, that could be my hiking technique, am I injury prone or am I doing it well? And is my strategic knowledge good? Do I have some great strategic rules that I implement? Do I have my tactical rules in place that I know if A, then B, I operate at C? And then physical, mental, environmental, and then, how long should I be working at this? Because, we operate in an expensive sport. Maybe at one point you might not be improving fast enough and you need to make a tough decision. And that's 90%. Right, more than that, like 95%.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it's something my girlfriend actually asked me about the other day. She asked me, why do you think you didn't get higher than you did in the sport? And my answer was very simple. It was amount of time I spent at it. If I look now at the Ilka men's fleet, and I see guys winning and podium in events who were at my level or behind me, say, 8 years ago. And so there is really, as you were saying, that long-term perspective that sailors need to have. But I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with, because I think just human nature, we want to get results right away. So do you have any tips on how you can actually approach that and I guess in a way be comfortable with knowing that you might not get the results this year, next year, maybe even 3 years from now, but it might be 5 years down the line?
That is a leap of faith, right? Like that's a self-belief position, and self-belief is often a critical function in that mental factor domain for most sports. That self-belief that I believe that if I invest my time, effort, and resources, I can progress. I can win one day. I believe that I'm capable of doing that. And so what I'd say is, like, coming back to the original question, if you've kind of got that belief, it's then also thinking, like, what kind of time frames are involved and can you calculate that? So a really easy way to do that might be, let's say you're in the Masters and you look at the current Masters world champion. Maybe they've won 5 times. What was their lead up to winning their first Masters World Championship? What was their background?
Yeah.
How long did they spend sailing? You know, you can go and ask them. It's the Masters space. Everyone's open. They're happy to have a beer after sailing. Like it's a good opportunity. But you can start to collect some data around the timeframes. And you know, you spoke about your own story, Dan, where the people who you grew up sailing with, you stopped, they continued, and now they're starting to get the results. What we know in sailing is it's such a long burn development sport compared to other sports. It's actually a disadvantageous position in funding models in high performance sport because you're investing in an 8 to 10 year odyssey often. And so from the funding body's perspective, they're like, oh, I could invest in swimming and get this done in 4. Like, you know, so it's a bit of a tricky spot. But what I'd say is, as you're going along, the most important thing is not worrying so much about the results, but really staying focused around your process. So that 3 to 5 things we spoke about before, like being really diligent to focus on a couple of different things, that can carry you. And that's a success too. You know, you obtain the little outcome or process goals that you're after. That's a feeling of success as well. It can kind of keep you moving along the journey because, as you know, development is non-linear. You can have peaks and troughs along the way, but as long as it's doing this along the way, you're on the way to where you want to go. The hard question, and the hard question that a lot of sailors have to ask themselves is it me? What am I doing and I could do differently? It's a self-awareness piece. And it starts with, for one, self-awareness and systems to actually keep checking and challenging yourself, but also that classic thing around having a critical or constructive friend, whether that's a coach or maybe your buddy who you sail with if you're a Masters guy and you kind of neck and neck, like being able to have those open conversations, like, what am I doing that's not quite there? Because that might tell you some gaps, and that's something else you can work on, right?
And as you say, I think you need to have that objective standpoint from external. And what I'd like to hear as well, and this is a somewhat selfish question, I feel like in my own sailing, I was very focused on like pushing as hard as I can, training as hard as I can to try and make those results come quicker. Do you find that is also a trap other sailors fall into? And if so, how can they kind of pace themselves a bit more? Like we talked about knowing it's a long-term game, but is there something else in terms of knowing, okay, if I just stick at this, let's say 4 sessions a week on the water, and I don't need to sail every single day, but if I can stick with these 4 sessions a week on the water for 5 years, I might be at the top of the nationals or the worlds, obviously depending on where you're starting from and class and many different things like that. But yeah, do you have any advice for someone who feels like they can work harder and things will come quicker? Because I think in a lot of the case, it just doesn't happen that way.
I think good question. And as we spoke about before, development being non-linear. So essentially on the way to your goal, like there's going to be peaks and troughs, right? But I think like, let's say it's a conversation around, I'm moving along, there's been some challenges along the way, I'm not sure where I am, you know, I don't really understand. It is coming back to that objectivity, it is being able to come back and work out, you know, from your results, from the conditions that you're in, all these kind of things, to get really clear on, well, where am I at and am I actually progressing? And when I think about like some of your development points that you were speaking about, you talked about working harder, right? Someone like Tom Burden, he would say something like, yeah, work harder, but be smarter. So, you know, try and outwork everyone else. And he definitely went through a period like that because I was right there with him. But then on top of that, he was like, how can I be more deliberate to use my training well to obtain better fitness, more quality on water time, less time wastage on the water. So he was the champion of coming up and yelling, hey, you want to keep chatting to the coach or you want to keep going? Like time saving, right? Like as in being efficient. And I think like those kind of things add up. And so if you keep coming back to those kind of principles, like try and be smarter, particularly if you've got limited time. Like if you if you're working, or let's say you're a kid and you're at school and you're getting one afternoon a week of training, and maybe you get out on the weekend on both days because you really love your sailing, don't go out and do junk miles, man. Like, that's not going to get you anywhere quick. I mean, you're going to get better, but it's going to be so slow compared to someone else who's really dedicating their training based on a plan and knows what they're doing. Like, something that other sports like triathlon, or they're very prescriptive. They're very prescriptive in terms of development. Typically physical sports or physiological sports can be that, but you can do that in sailing too. So kind of keep coming back to being deliberate, but don't stop working hard in a class like laser, because you will get punished. But make sure that you take the recovery and the breaks. And I got a good quote for you later if you ask me a question about some of the good people I've sailed with and stuff from around the world. But yeah, keep going though. Feel free.
Yeah, and I think that's something I've been thinking a lot about recently, is skill acquisition. And I really had this shift in mindset recently around a lot of training that I do. And I think this is very applicable in sailing, is a lot of people kind of don't approach their training from a skill acquisition standpoint. And this is something I've taken now from more like the strength training, powerlifting, Olympic weightlifting sort of world, is that I'll give this example. When people think about getting stronger in the gym, a lot of people just approach it from a physical standpoint. But really what it is, it's a skill that your body needs to have to be able to clean and jerk however many kilos. And it's something that, because it's a skill, it's something that you need to work at constantly. And something that I heard recently was about how a lot of research is showing that there's a lot of benefit in what they'd call kind of greasing the groove. So doing like not necessarily very hard efforts, but consistently working on one particular skill just at a level within your ability, because that's where you really have the opportunity to actually improve at that skill without pushing yourself to like the maximum of your capability, where it's much harder to improve when you're at your limit. Do you agree with kind of the crossovers to sailing, or do you think there's some like aspect from that point of view?
No, fantastic. Like, I think about like isolation training. So last week I was out on the water with a younger female sailor, Frances Beebe. We were doing some speed work, and so upwind speed, moderate day, small waves outside the first island chain in Brisbane. And when you break it down, you look at kind of the holy trinity of kind of speed skills in sailing. So you look at trim, and that could include gears and main sheet trim in the laser. So gears, Cunningham, Vang, outhaul, main sheet trim. And then you look at steering, and then you look at body positioning, which in this case was windy enough to hike. So, and what you can do, and to your point around 70%, you can hike at 80%, and you can focus on being as accurate as possible with your gear changes and your, let's say, steering. So you've isolated out your body positioning. You're focusing on what's controllable, so that you become a higher level of proficiency in it. So because you can focus on your gears when you're not flat stick, head to the water hiking, but then when you come back to it later and you bring the isolated thing back and you add it back into your speed test, now you can actually hike, but you're thinking, oh, I actually do need to change the gears more than I thought I needed to get the speed. So definitely isolation training works. And it's very good at focusing an attention around one specific element of, let's say, a dynamic skill. So speed skills are a dynamic skill.
Yeah. Okay. So it is very applicable in sailing then. And as you mentioned, like there's a lot of skills where if you're hiking all out, you're just not going to be able to focus on them. And sometimes it is about dialing it back a bit to actually get better at the thing you want to improve on, and where that gap is that we've spoken a lot about today. So given your experience, Ash, with multiple different programs, sports, athletes, what would you do today to set up the ideal training or squad environment for anyone who's listening and is trying to find a team to work with?
Yeah, good question. And I had a good bit of experience in this in my previous role with Australian Sailing, thinking about how to structure teams and what was needed in the different states and so forth. So, look, I think that what I would do if I was given, here you go, here's a program, you can take ownership of it and you can set it up as you would. I think some of the models that occur in Europe that are highly centralized are definitely the way to go. So what I mean by that is sailing in a place that typically has a really good range of conditions. So you can kind of sail in a bit of flat water, a bit of chop, maybe you can get some waves, and it's all within a saleable distance from your club or you're operating from. I think that would be a really good start point. I think if you were then kind of considering the next stages, it would be that the equipment that you were using was quality. So the sailors, when they're on the water, the coach boat, like all those kind of elements, you have what you need. You don't necessarily need the bells and whistles, but you definitely need a coach boat that's capable of going and doing the hours, and you definitely need, let's say it's in the Ilka, you need 4 to 5 quality Ilkas that can have the right kind of equipment on it, like relatively new equipment to train on regularly. You need 4 or 5, like the magic number is probably 4, just because then you can recreate a lot of scenarios in training.
Okay, so 4 sailors,
Yeah, it's a great way to start. I would say be right near an international airport, so it doesn't matter where you are in the world. The ability to be close and central to competition is always a win. That's why it's so handy for the Europeans versus us in Australia, and while we have to make do with probably the best weather in the world, but you know, like we're always traveling to competition. They can go home. I think the additional benefit of centralization is you can get all your performance support and your coaching and everything under one roof, and that's really beneficial. If you can be really time efficient, you know, go to the gym in the morning, have a good break, eat well, drink well, rest, then get out and do what you need to do in the afternoon, or invert that depending on what the wind is, you know, looking like. I think these centralized environments that are typically really efficient, time efficient, they're really beneficial to sailing, particularly when you can stack everything up on a trailer and, you know, head up the road to another, you know, quality competition. I think that's definitely a big consideration. I think for men, lots of nice kind of challenges in the environment, not too many distractions. So young men, not too many nightclubs and girls around. But on the women's side, you kind of want some of the guys around. You know, they act as buffers. It helps with the group dynamic element of a women's squad, you know, keeping everyone kind of working together and adding guys in to almost add a level of competition, particularly radial boys sailors. It's an amazing mix, like to have you know, young, fast, aggressive, you know, boys sailors sailing with open level women. Great example, and often works so well, you know, when you look around the models. But this is what I think would work. And I believe that based off my own experience, but I also think that if given the opportunity to do it, and you could support the athletes or the sailors to move into that location and gain access to university or whatever they need at that age and stage, it would be an amazing opportunity when done well, particularly with world-class or world-best coaching attached to it.
Okay. Yeah. So it's actually a lot around kind of the logistics and the
environment.
Setup. Yeah, exactly. So literally environment, where we're not just talking about the people you're with, it's also where you physically are and what you have around you. And I completely agree. Like, you look at some of the countries here, like here in Aarhus in Denmark, for example, we've got the International Sailing Center, where they've got a gym, they've got indoor like boat hangar store, like a hangar to store your boats, fully rigged. And then depending on the wind direction here, you can get lots of different conditions. And just the amount of efficiency you can have from going from your gym to your boat in the same building, fully rigged, to going straight on the water, is huge. And quite a few countries have that sort of system now. And I guess for the everyday sailor who might not have the ability to influence or get that type of setup, I think it's worth noting that at least consider, and this applies for youth sailors who might still be going to school or master sailors who are working, how can you be the most efficient with your time that you have to training? And if you're, having to commute long ways to the sailing club or to the gym, it's just adding extra burden in training and extra time that you need to actually train, and makes it harder to do that sort of greasing the groove where you're constantly working on the skill that we talked about earlier. So that's a really good point. And I think also the equipment standpoint that you mentioned as well is probably something that a lot of the audience might overlook for budgetary reasons. But if you think about it, if you're spending a lot of the time not training because you're fixing something, or you're on the water and you break something, that is also a massive cost. And in terms of your time, that it is costing you to waste that time where you're not effectively training. So it might be better to invest in better equipment, not necessarily brand new, but you might find good training sails from Olympic sailors who are going through sails every regatta, basically. And if you're using that equipment to train with as well, and this is something we've spoken a lot about in the past, if you're training on high quality equipment, it's a much closer simulation to what you're going to be doing at your key regatta. Whereas if you're training on poor equipment, you're not necessarily training the actual skills you need for your peak event or the long-term goal.
Yeah, that's a really good summation, and I've heard it in a line before. So the good kind of one-liner for it is train like you race, race like you train. So try and have an approximate set of gear that's quality enough so that you don't practice bad habits, with a blown out sail or breakages all the time, or the things that just you wouldn't tolerate in racing. Why tolerate that in training? Now I know that costs money, but you can get closer to what quality is, right? Every one of us can take care of your boat. You can do some maintenance. So laser sail doing maintenance. Wow. but
it's a bit of a stigma.
Boats, we could be a lot better. And and me included. I could certainly have been better in my early years as a laser sailor in that. Brett Bayer, if you ever heard this, would be kind of smiling to himself, because I broke top section after top section after top section, the alloy ones, because I didn't end for end them, or just stuff that would have saved a lot of time. And when you don't have coach boats in the water and you break a top section in the middle of Sydney Harbour, it's a bad day.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be in the middle of the ferry channel in Sydney Harbour with a broken top section and no coach boat. And so as you were saying, there is also just a physical risk as well to training on bad equipment. And you mentioned some of the advice Brett's given you and things you've heard from Tom Burton along the way. I think everyone listening would be very keen to hear what are 3 pieces of advice that you've picked up from some of these sailors who everyone listening would have heard of, like Tom Burton or Matt Wern or anyone else you've worked with.
I think can start with TV. So one of them is that the system's not going to get you there. You've got to get yourself there. So he spoke to the importance of the environment. It is important to have a good system around you, and a good system will carry you a long way. But ultimately, it's going to be you. And what he's truly speaking to there is about ownership. So we had him come in and do a talk to our national development squad, and that was his message. And it was a really powerful message, and it was well received back in 2023, I think. And but that was a great message from him around, you can't just expect other people to carry you and do it for you. You're going to have to take ownership, and you're going to have to lead your own campaign. I think another good line from him would be, leave no stone unturned. I think that's in one of his interviews somewhere after winning the gold medal, and really speaks to that. Here's all the different factors and here's all the different attributes that I've got to become at least world-class in. Tom Burton is famous for being world-class in everything, not necessarily being world best in anything, in a couple of things, but not compared to, say, Werney, who goes and does it twice the next time around. And Tom possibly a little bit more of a journeyman along the way, for, getting it done pretty quickly, but being world class, coming second and third in a lot of regattas, but always being there. And then when under pressure, making it count at the Olympics against Tonchi in 2016, right? So Tom, TB, great start, great man, and a good friend. I think the other one, and I was laughing about earlier, was I got to spend quite a few years in Sweden. And when I was living in Sweden, I got to train with people like Rasmus Miergren and Jesper Stalheim. But the quote from Rasmus, which is always a winner, was, hurry up and rest, or hurry up and chill, right? So what made Raz really kind of interesting to me, a bit like almost like canonical, or like this, I don't know what the right word is, like a paradox, was he was pretty good at looking lazy, but he was incredibly efficient with how he spent his time. He's very smart. I wouldn't say, like, if we looked at the physical capacity of Rasmus, like, he was strong and he was fit, but probably not as much as the other top 10 guys in the world. But then what he made up for that was in things like recovery. Like, that guy could sleep so well, like so soundly. He did a lot of work on his mental skills, like a lot. Like, near the end of his campaigns, he didn't even have a technical coach. He had a psych in the boat with him all the time, or a mental skills coach. So no technical sailing coaching, just how am I staying on a level today to keep making good decisions, because that's what's going to help me win. So kind of that's the paradox when you hear about it from the outside, but that's that mental skills side. I think from the women's side, like, so for me, probably Mara, evidence or proof, really how important that is to build confidence. So we spent a lot of time doing things like speed work or lining up with other great female sailors, like world-class female sailors. And she kept going, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not good enough. But then with enough work and really kind of deliberate focus on speed skills and building up the skills that come in around that too, like let's say straight lining or shorter moderate course racing, she started to beat them. And then when she started to beat them, she started to go, I can do this. And then after she started to be able to do that, maybe Melbourne, say, in the lead up to the Worlds, which was her Olympic trials, it became, I not only can do it, I can do it on demand. Like I've got a real power, like I've got a real strength here. So in things like light to moderate, say 3-4 knots up to about 12-13 knots, she was world class speed wise, and she still is, I'm sure. And so like that, the evidence or the proof to build confidence, you earn that by going out and doing the miles, and it's what she needed. And it was a good coaching lesson for me as well. Like, I couldn't just keep telling her, you're good enough, you're going to be the best. She had to see it, and then she believed it. The other one for me probably is Lijia. So spending some time with Lijia in 2009, one of the things that a lot of people, well, maybe some people do know, but maybe they don't. Lijia grew up with deafness and some blindness. And she's very reliant on her compass. So like a tactical, like back then a manual compass, because that was 2009, right? And so she'd be spending a lot of time watching her compass. And what amazed me was this woman who's come up in the Chinese system, which was extremely prescriptive and didn't really have much, I would say, quality technical or historical background in sailing. Her curiosity, her thirst for knowledge, being a student of the sport, resilience, toughness, all these things. What an amazing woman. And the reason that she could win a bronze and gold medal from China was because she is Lijia. And, these are the kind of people that, and she's got a great book. You can probably find that.
I can put that in the link to the show notes.
Great, fantastic book. And I think that, like, this kind of approach from her, like across every domain, she did a lot of that herself. And then even got access to foreign coaches to kind of supercharge it. So bravo, from a place that wasn't easy to be able to do that. That's an exceptional achievement. I think probably the only other one is probably Blackers. And so
Michael Blackburn, famous laser sailor and coach.
So Olympic bronze medalist, and then I think 3-time gold medal coach, like serious credibility. And I think like once he told me really openly, and he said, you don't have the attention to detail, like you need to sweat the small stuff. And I wasn't great at sweating the small stuff, if I'm really honest. I like to get into the big rocks.
Yeah.
But I think that might be the reason why I finished kind of 5 to 10, 7th at the Worlds, 5 to 10 in Europe a lot near the
Yeah.
end of my campaign, because I didn't sweat the small stuff. And
Mm.
it's probably one of the big lessons that I might take away from my own campaign around why attention to detail is so important.
So as those final, like, not even 1%ers, even smaller than that, as you're really getting to kind of the pinnacle of the sport, that really start adding up and talk to the marginal gains that you mentioned earlier. And at that point, they're even more marginal than they might be for a club sailor.
0.5% here, getting more proficient at a condition set that you don't normally sail in there. Being combative and doing competitor analysis with, imagine Tom and Tonchi or Wernie and Mickey, who are they? What do we need to know about them? How do we beat them? Where's their weakness? Where's our strength? This is the attention to detail. This is the final few percent. And it's often said that the final few percent come in the top 2 inches. And that's definitely something that I would have learned from some of the top sailors. Like, when it comes to it, a lot of the early weighting is around skills and learning those good frameworks for strategy and tactics and getting fast, getting fit. The end game is mental.
And you mentioned that with Rasmus and also a bit with Mara. And when you were talking about Mara, I couldn't help but think of I don't know if you know the Alex Hormozi quote, the kind of business guru or thought leader. And he says, and I'm going to butcher it, but he says something along the lines of, confidence doesn't come from telling yourself you can do the thing. It comes from years of undeniable proof that you can do the thing. And that,
great quote. Yeah.
And I think that actually ties in really nicely to what we talked about earlier in terms of training at your level where you're currently at, and not necessarily pushing yourself to extreme scenarios where you're never really going to thrive, and just constantly building on, okay, I'm winning at club level, and now I can start training with guys who have won the states or the regional championship, and you work with them, and then over time you'll start winning some like short course races against them in training, and then all of a sudden you'll win that regional or state championship. And as you go, exactly, you just build up the confidence that you can do it, and then you might start training with the guys who are top 5 at the nationals and beating them, and then eventually you're at their level. So it's really about working at where you are now to not only build the skills but also the confidence. I think they're kind of hand in hand, and you can't really have one without the other in a sense.
Agreed. Yeah.
I would like to hear, before we wrap up, you mentioned Rasmus and his mental approach, and how at the end of his campaign where he won bronze at the London Olympics, he was only working with a psychologist or a mental coach. And you also mentioned Lijia's focus on mindset. Do you have any other tips for anyone listening about mindset and what they should be focusing on that we haven't already touched on?
I think, like, with sailing in mind, right, because it's such a complicated sport, you've got to be a pretty good multivariable processor, and then off kind of, let's say, collecting those variables. So think about strategy. So where's the wind on the course? What's the tide doing? All these kind of factors that come into making a decision. Or is there course bias? Is there pin bias? Where am I going to start? What am I going to do? What's my big picture plan, right? There's all these variables that go into that. And so you've got to be a good kind of computer mind. And if you're not a good computer mind, like a good multivariable processor, then you really need to create frameworks of understanding or maps of meaning to really break those things down to make repetitive or repeat processes. And I needed that personally. I had a sports psychologist, Rosie, work with me to help develop that. And that was a breakthrough for me from like top 30, 40 to the world, in the world, to about the top 10 in the world. And I would definitely put a lot of that down to her ability to help me develop frameworks.
Right.
Because there was so many variables that I just needed to kind of compressed down to make good decisions. So
Yep.
multivariable capability and decision making.
Yep.
I think another really good one would be composure under pressure. I think at the very top end of town, the ability to have the confidence to know no matter what happens, I'm going to perform is an amazing skill. And when I think about Tom Slingsby, like I grew up training with him a little bit. We had some time together through 9 to 12, right? So when he's finishing in London. And one of the things that always struck me around him was this exuded confidence of I will win, not I'm going to win or I can win, I will win. And it came out of him like this, almost like this aura. And it was real.
Yeah.
He believed it and he did it. And I think that Werney might have been able to replicate that, maybe TB to a degree, but Slingo had that above all. And that was really intimidating as a competitor of him. And I was a competitor of him. And you know, I think back to those times and, you know, looking at him lining up in strong wind, and I was good in strong wind, like as a sailor, but he just had a 6th gear.
Wow.
It was an impressive speed skill. And later on we developed, you know, we chased that, we got better, and some other people in the world were able to do that too. But, you know, he had it at the time, and I will win. Not I'm going to, or I could.
Yeah.
That's a mindset thing,
Wow.
right? So composure under pressure, and then self-belief. And then I think probably the classic one around sailing, you're in an environment and you're in an equipment sport, you need to be extremely good at identifying what's going on in the environment around you and with your boat and adapting it quickly. There's good names for this. I don't want to say it because I might get in trouble, but basically it's like the OODA loops of the military. Observe, orient, decide, act. You know, you want to be constantly updating this information to make the best decisions for what you're trying to do, whether that's changing your gears or there's more wind coming down that side of the course, I've got to get there. And how do you train that? Well, you've got to practice classic observation, right? Like you've got to get your head up, and you can't have your head up when you're hiking flat stick because you're not fit enough, and you can't have your head up when you're not skilled enough. Those are some really good areas to lean into, I reckon. Just those.
That's a really good starting point. And personally, I think the observation was an incredibly hard skill to train, and something I still struggle with a lot. Just now I'm thinking of some potential ways to do it, where, you know, you might have your coach, like, for example, drop something in the water in some random area of the course, and you force yourself to kind of look at it, or maybe you could have the coach like drive up in the coach boat to a area of the course and like hold up a sign, and you kind of need to keep your head out of the boat to see what he or she is holding up, as a way to practice that. And I know Blackers is someone who comes up with a lot of kind of creative drills to train things like that. Did he have anything to work on? He did,
but I don't want to give too much away because I'll get into trouble. You know, we've still got a great relationship, and I think that the one thing that you've already identified is it was creative in problem solving, right? So thinking of ways to always, if there's a challenge, or let's say it's observational on the long frame, so you know, right up the course. It might be initially from a coaching perspective, trying to understand what your athlete even sees. So you really want to try and get into the head of your athlete. And I've seen, like, and nothing to do with Blackers, but I've seen like lots of ways to do that. Like people attach cameras to their hat, and they just look around where, like, they don't know where they look. They don't really know what they're observing, and they might find they're bow watching all the time, or they've got their head down in the boat and they're changing their gears or something, right? And you can solve for problems like this. Another one
to assess where you're looking first, to know where your starting point is.
Yeah, perceptual drills are really good too, and that, again, nothing to do with Blackers. Like a long line drill could be 2 fixed points, you know, no transit, so particularly with the sea on one side, so nothing to look at, you know, out one side. And there's venues around the world like that all the time. Palmer is a classic one for that. You don't have a transit on one side. Let's say you're kind of sailing up to the line. How do you know when you're in let's say you're in the middle of the line, third up, third down, where you are? Well, you can put your hand up as an athlete and you can have your coach comment on it. Like that's a classic one. And I know that happens in different countries. I don't think that's a secret, but it's perceptual development, because you're trying to constantly help to see where you are in space and time, right? Because it's hard to know.
Yeah.
It's a trainable skill.
Yeah, and that's also, it's something I've always been blown away by when you talk to guys like TB or like Tom Burton or Matt Warren, and you're in a debrief with these guys after a day of training, and they might say, oh yeah, do you remember when this was the transit on the line, like this specific house somewhere on Sydney Harbour? And they've kind of all picked that up, that this was the exact point where they were using as their reference on the line. And not only the fact that they pick up that like specific or observe that specific detail, they then also remember it afterwards as well, which is something that has always shocked me with top sailors, is they can recall incidents or like situations on the race course from years ago, and exactly, at the snap of a fingers.
Recall. So add that to your mental skills list, Dan, because that is epic. Because recall supports the review and updating capability massively. And I know that Tom Burton, for example, has an incredible recall. Like, he could talk in detail around any individual lineup, any individual small race that we did in detail about each decision along the way. I wouldn't say he's like, when you come across him, just joking about mates here, but doesn't appear to be the sharpest tool in the shed, but that guy like, and so, you know, that's the kind of thing that comes up. But remember, all of that's a methodology. That's something that you can train. That's something that you can practice to become better at, even if you're not naturally, you know, attributed with it.
Yeah, and I guess it as well, it does come down to what we've talked about in terms of being fit enough to sail the boat, having the skills to the point where you can keep your head out of the boat, also be very conscious of what decisions you're making in real time, and also be very conscious of what's going on around you, because I feel like a lot of sailors can get too stuck into the motions of sailing that they don't have the mental capacity to focus on everything else going on around them, and also what's going on in their own brain whilst they're racing. So I think that's a really good point to wrap up the mental conversation. And as we move on to the second last question, I'd like to hear from your point of view, Ash. What's the number one tip that you can give sailors listening to this that want to get better?
I think like something that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's not necessarily the number one tip, but it's a really important one. And it's one that I've probably learned a little bit, particularly in the back end of my own sailing career, definitely as a coach, and even more so in management, is you've got to measure and record everything in this sport. And if you're not constantly measuring where you're at and where you're trying to get to, you kind of, you know, licking your finger and putting it in the air, you're kind of leaving things down to fade a little bit. And I think if you go out, you might be able to find an interview from Matt Warren at the end of I'm pretty sure it was the Paris Games, around not leaving things down to fate. And this keeps speaking to this, and if it was one thing, it would probably be this deliberate nature, or this deliberate approach, the need to be deliberate in everything that you do to become the best in the world, or the best in whatever that version is for you, right? Maybe it's the best in your club, maybe it's the best in your country in the Masters, but you will do that by being diligent, and you should definitely try to measure and record, because if you measure and record, and this is the other classic quote on this, you don't make mistakes more than twice or three times. You learn quickly and you iterate and you grow. If you don't record and you forget, you can come back and make the same mistakes again. I'm definitely you know, guilty of that in my early sailing career. I could have been much better at that. And so keeping a journal, you know, writing down the conditions of the day and what you've learned from that, like that deliberate approach is just so critical. And that's definitely where I'll finish, because that's just such a winner. Yeah,
that's a great point. And I think I did that a lot throughout my career, but I think what I would do now, and I think this is just completely ad-libbing, but I do this with other aspects of life, and something everyone can do now. Make that journal digital, and then what you could do is put that all into something like ChatGPT or Notebook LM from Google, and then you can like instantly ask the AI, what did I do in these conditions on this day, and what did I need to improve, or what was my training partner doing? And I feel like doing something like that could be a game changer for someone who's up and coming, to have that record of everything, and then also find out very easily. Because my problem is I have like maybe 5 different notebooks from different years of sailing, and it's like, okay, how do I go back to a certain day and a certain race to remember those lessons?
And the opportunity to digitalize it is going to be massive. And then also in time, you'll be able to even copy over video.
Yeah.
And then that video will be analysed by AI systems. Already happening in swimming. Swimming Australia's got a project called Project Atlantis. They're doing that. Golf Australia has a stroke coach.
Yeah.
With AI, like basically scanning the stroke. So things are changing quickly, and if you're a coach out there, you need to adapt too. And if you're an athlete, or a sailor, look for the inputs around that. I know that Victor Kovalenko's got his own AI. He's training his own LLM.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Cool. So learn something new every day.
Yeah, nice. So number one tip: measure and record. So I think that's been a really good conversation, Ash, and I really appreciate. And I'm sure the audience appreciates you joining and spending the time with us. We've gone for about 2 hours now.
With some technical difficulties.
Yeah, exactly. But before we wrap up, you're obviously doing your own consulting and private coaching now. So can you just tell us a little bit about what some of the programs you offer are, and what services you're offering, and where can anyone listening who wants to get in contact with you reach you and find out more?
Thanks, Dan. I think at the moment I'm doing kind of work in high performance, I guess what you call consulting management. So typically methodologies in sport, approaches to kind of systemization, building pathways, so developing pathways from the ground up. That's a lot of the work that I've done with, say, Taekwondo. Supporting categorization and selection policies, like this kind of work. But a lot of that too is also advisory around how to approach athlete development, and this is the conversation we're really having now. And I guess the products that I could offer would include things like that in different sports. Might not be the right audience for that, but what it is interesting is applying some of those methodologies into your own campaigns. And so being able to take that out and draw that into a bit of a campaign plan. If you're an athlete and you're seeking that, or you're a sailor that wants that level of input, that is something that I can genuinely help out with. And I'd base it on those models that we've spoken about today anyway. I think that the inputs really need to come from you, and then any other data that we can collect, results, some of the video, as Dan, you have that idea around remote coaching, but that is one thing. In terms of, I guess the other side of sailing too is I do get out on the water occasionally, but not as much as I used to by any means. I am open to coaching and being on the water and doing that again, but certainly for the right campaigns. I'm not particularly interested in long-term campaign work in the master space or the youth, but I appreciate what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go, and I'm happy to provide guidance on it. High performance is my game. That's what I love. I love the 1%ers and trying to find the answers to the problems. But I think really otherwise, I can send through the details and you can attach it to this if anyone wants to get in touch. I think sometimes it's just about having a conversation, and there's guidance and advisory, and people that are really experienced. It doesn't have to just be me. Leaning on people who have had the experience of seeing what success looks like, particularly in different environments. They're really good sounding boards to play off and think about. And I'm a free agent now because I'm not really connected to the Australian sailing team like I was for the last 20 years. So, there's an opportunity in that too. Hopefully that covers it, Dan.
No, that's great. So email or Facebook, what would be?
Email's good. And just feel free to introduce yourself, and then you can always set up a conversation. And like I said before, the conversation's where it starts to understand where you're at and what you're trying to do. And feel free, like at any level, because I think a lot of it is this diligent planning approach that's required. And if you're not doing the right things and you're not guiding your own campaign, even with great coaching, sometimes you don't get the outcome you're after. So
okay, so really focusing on the campaign planning and long-term development, and it sounds like you're very keen to help out sailors with that, and then also on water coaching for the right campaigns and right athlete or sailor, but also I guess if there's any national teams or national sports federations or people listening here who are looking for someone to develop a performance program and performance pathways, and as you were mentioning, like things like selection criteria,
coach development, athlete development methodologies. So
get in contact.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years.
Yeah, great. And as you mentioned before the call as well, I guess any business leaders as well, you're also working on getting high performance out of businesses. So I think
and that's actually an awesome space because it's new, right? For me, it's new. But what's interesting is the methodologies and say a lot of business and or like even manufacturing methodologies like the Kaizen principles or Kaizen principles was what Dave Brailsford studied before he began the marginal gains concept. So continuous improvement, right? That's very relevant to sailing. Some of the more like Toyota oriented things like Mura and waste, like trying to minimize waste in your environment. That could be time and resource for a sailor. Don't go to world championships when you can't sail around the course in 15 knots. So there's a lot of crossover in business and sport, and I'm exploring that at the moment. I'm really enjoying it, and what it's leading to is strategy and kind of thinking about new ways to address this in business, and that's been fun.
No, that's awesome to hear. Ash, thank you very much for joining us, and we wish you all the best with the consulting and the new gigs, and hopefully we can have you back sometime soon.
Easy, Dan. Good to see you.
Yeah, likewise.